There are mornings in the American West when the fog is so thick that it is hard to tell the line between life and death. That day, in the chilly Hawkthorn Valley, Clara Whitfield, a woman who had known loss enough, found a strange man collapsed in the grass, his shirt stained with blood. He whispered just one sentence, his voice broken, "Don't worry, you won't be alone." But at that moment, Clara was the one who had to make a choice, leave to stay safe, or kneel down to save a stranger who was taking his last breaths. If it were you at 50, 60, or older after having been hurt enough, scared enough, would you dare to believe in kindness again? Would you dare to put your hand on someone else's wound? When the wound in your heart has not yet healed, there are small moments in life that can change your destiny. Come join me in that moment and see how far kindness can take two people. If you feel your heart fluttering, please like, share, subscribe to the channel to start this journey with me. The wind blew through Dustfall Meadow, swirling the dry grasses into tiny swirls that seemed to tell forgotten stories of the West. The afternoon fell slowly, the sun red as an old copper coin sinking into the horizon. The space was so open and quiet that one felt as if one could reach out and touch the loneliness of the land. In the scene, Clara June Whitfield rode her chestnut-colored horse, Willow. The middle-aged woman wore a heavy northern coat, a little stiff and old-fashioned for the Western style, but still warm enough to ward off the wind. Her prematurely gray hair was tied back at the nape of her neck. The wrinkles around her eyes and mouth did not detract from her elegance. On the contrary, they told the story of a woman who had endured tragedy and still stood firm as if it were natural. Clara had left Minnesota for almost half a year. She had chosen Silver Creek Junction not because it promised anything grand, but because she had heard it was peaceful, far enough from the past to breathe. Life no longer had many things that tired her, but the sadness of her husband who had died in the shipyard fire was still a long, hard-to-fill rift. So she left, as simply as a tree suddenly wants to change seasons. Her eyes were fixed on Silver Creek Junction, still nearly 10 miles away, but the wind was getting stronger, and a vague premonition made Clara tighten her grip on the reins. In the middle of the vast grassland, she saw something strange. Not a jaguar, nor a wild horse, but a human figure stretched on the dark grass, eerily still. Clara slowly let Willow come closer. The wind picked up, tossing her long hair. Clara's heart began to pound, a beat that was out of keeping with the calm expression on her face. As she got closer, she saw that it was a man, a cowboy, or rather a roadie. His dusty clothes, frayed leather jacket, and cowboy hat lay scattered a few feet away. Beside him was a long, dark red smear of blood, dried by the hot midday sun. Clara slid off the saddle and walked slowly toward the man. She knelt, her cold hand touching his broad shoulder. His skin was colder than she expected, but his chest still heaved slightly. "Can you hear me?" Clara said softly, her voice low, soft, but firm. At first there was no response, but as she leaned in to listen for breathing, the man stirred slightly. His eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. Those eyes made Clara stop. They were the eyes of someone who had seen what many avoided all their lives. Gray, deep, and misty. Eyes from a soul weary from too many long journeys. The man tried to move his lips. His voice was like the wind whistling through an old roof. "Don't worry." The whisper brought back something very old to Clara. It was the same as the last thing her husband had said before the fire engulfed the shipyard. In that moment, Clara seemed to hear the sound of the roof collapsing, the crackling of wood, and the sound of him holding her hand one last time in the hospital. "Don't worry, June. You're stronger than you think." The old pain resurfaced, but strangely enough,
It did not bring Clara down. On the contrary, it made her more alert. Clara leaned closer, her voice whispering but firm. "You won't be alone." The man closed his eyes, as if he believed the statement immediately. Clara examined the wound. Under his coat, there was a bullet hole in his shoulder, and blood was still seeping out despite the cold. His shirt was soaked, and he smelled of metal. He had a large bruise on his chest, as if someone had hit him hard with a hard object. Clara did a quick count. He weighed at least 180 pounds, and she was a middle-aged woman without much strength. But her hands, accustomed to caring for a dying husband, made her act like a natural nurse. She took off her scarf and tore off a section to stop the bleeding. Then she used the saddle belt and the spare cloth to tie it back together. Willow stood still behind, occasionally sniffing as if sensing the heavy air. Clara tried to lift the man, but he barely moved. She bit her lip and looked around, her eyes scanning the vast expanse of Dustfall Meadow. There was no one, no house, no camp, just her, the injured man, and the cold wind that was getting stronger. Clara sighed softly. "We have to go." She took the rope, made a loop, and tried to pull him up onto the horse. Willow was a gentle horse, not used to taking extra loads without being introduced, but today she stood still. Perhaps she understood something important was happening. Clara lifted little by little, putting strength into her arms that were no longer young. With each pull, she felt her teeth grind with the effort. Sweat beaded on her temples despite the cold. Somehow, she finally managed to get part of the cowboy's body onto the horse's back. But as she prepared to climb up to control the horse, the wind picked up again, whipping up dust in swirls. And in the distance, Clara heard the sound of horses, not one, but many. Her heart rate increased. Who is coming? Friend or foe? Westerners often say good people do not appear in dust storms. Willow turned her head, giving a slight tug on the reins as a warning. Clara put her hand on the man's empty holster. They had taken his weapon and left him to die in the middle of the field. She looked toward the approaching dust cloud, her lips pressed together. In the tense moment, Clara whispered to the unconscious man, "No matter who is coming, I will not abandon you." And the wind in Dustfall Meadow paused a beat as if to confirm that promise. The wind still whipped against Clara's face, chilling waves running straight down her collar. The man in front of her, the unconscious cowboy, was barely breathing. Willow stood still, stomping her hooves on the ground, as if sensing something approaching. In the distance, dust still swirled in arcs, then dissipated in the dim light of the late afternoon. Clara glanced that way, holding the reins tight. Her heart pounded heavily in her chest, not with fear, but with a familiar feeling, the foreboding of years in the wilderness. In the West, you can never be complacent. She had learned that the day her husband died, everything could collapse in a single breath. The dust settled. It was not horseback robbers, as she had feared, only an old man on a charcoal horse. He was thin, but sat as straight as a linden tree in the desert. His gray woolen coat was thick, old but sturdy. His silver hair, streaked with pale gold, was tangled in the wind. His right hand held the reins tightly, and his left had only 3 fingers. Clara recognized it immediately. The man was Elias Dusty Warner, known as Dusty, a former artillery officer who lived alone in a cabin near Hawkthorn Rock. She had heard of him, but had never met him. He was said to be short-tempered and uncompromising, like an old stone that had been rolled through years of war until it was worn away. Dusty gave Clara a cold, gray look. Then he looked over at the unconscious body she was holding. He raised his eyebrows. "That body? Where did you get it?" His voice was hoarse, like the sound of a rusty wooden door hinge. Clara swallowed lightly and stood up straight. "I don't know who he is, but he's alive. I need help." Dusty did not answer immediately. He glanced at the blood the cowboy had a few feet away, then looked straight at the face, which was purple from loss of blood. Somehow, his gaze changed, no longer cold as it had been at first, but something both recognizing and wary. "Ha!" he sighed. "Not an ordinary person." Then Dusty urged his horse a step closer. "What's his name?" "I haven't asked yet," Clara replied. He only muttered a few words. "I'm not sure," Dusty interrupted, just whispering a few words. "You dare to drag him onto the horse." Clara looked at him, not avoiding him. "I do not abandon the dying." Dusty was silent. For a few seconds, the only sound was the wind blowing between them. Then he turned and gestured. "Follow me. My cabin is about half a mile away. If we leave him out here a few more minutes, he'll be gone." Clara looked back at Isaac, his body leaning heavily against the saddle, and nodded. Dusty pulled the rope from his saddle, securing Isaac's body to Willow's back, tying it into a makeshift harness. Clara asked, "Can you lift him up? I can do it alone." Dusty smirked. "I only have 3 fingers left on my left." "Don't expect a miracle." But then he used his 3 remaining fingers and his right arm to support Isaac's shoulder. Clara leaned close, lifting his body onto the saddle. The two of them struggled for nearly a minute. When everything was done, Dusty said in a curt but not unpleasant voice, "Go slowly. Your horse is strong. I will lead the way." The small group moved through the thick grass. The dusk landscape cast a soft gray over them, as if dust and light were mingling. The trail back to the cabin was rough. The rocks were jagged and the wind whipped. Isaac shook slightly every time Willow struggled over a mound, forcing Clara to hold him tight with one hand and brace herself against the saddle with the other. For a moment, she looked at the cowboy's face. His face was pale, his lips purple, his breathing heavy and uneven. This man was on the border between life and death, a thin line she had seen before once enough to haunt him for life. Clara's heart softened involuntarily, not because of him, but because of that painful familiarity, the feeling of watching someone slowly fade away from this world, as light as smoke. But she couldn't let that happen again. As the sky darkened, they reached Dusty's cabin. The cabin stood on a low rocky slope, an oil lamp in the window casting a shaky yellow light. Around them, the wind blew through the stunted sagebrush, carrying the smell of dry earth and old ashes from the hearth. Dusty dismounted first and opened the door with a bang. The hinges creaked. Then he turned to look at Clara. "Bring him in. Put him on my bed." "Clara, where do you sleep?" Dusty shrugged. "Women and the dying come first. Old people sleeping on chairs won't die immediately." His voice was both bitter and warm in its own way. Clara helped Dusty carry Isaac in. The old man cleared the blanket, laid out a clean towel, and prepared a bowl of warm water. Clara used it to clean the wound around the cowboy's shoulder, wiping away the dirt and dried blood. In the flickering light of the fireplace, Clara could see Isaac's face clearly. His face was once handsome in the Western cowboy way, angular, rugged, a high, sunburned nose, a strong jawline. But now, those lines only made him look more pained. His thick brow furrowed, his eyes dark with exhaustion. Clara gently touched the cloth to the wound. Isaac groaned softly. Dusty stood with his arms crossed near the door, looking like someone used to this scene. "The bullet went through, but missed the bone," he said. The worst thing was the blood loss. Clara nodded. I need a needle and thread. Do you have any? Dusty took out a small tin box and threw it on the table. When I was in the army, I sewed more for myself than for my comrades. Can you use this? Clara did not look up. I took care of a dying man for 6 months. I can do it. Dusty was silent, his eyes changing. Only those who had lost someone could understand the way Clara spoke. A long while later, as Clara began to sew up the wound, Isaac opened his eyes. His breathing was heavy, but he was somewhat more alert. He looked at Clara. His eyes were hazy, but there was a hint of recognition. He tried to speak hoarsely. Don't. Clara placed her hand lightly on his chest. Shut up. You're losing a lot of blood. Isaac's chest heaved. He took a deep breath, trying to move his lips. Dusty stood nearby, looked into those eyes for a few seconds, then looked away. No one knew what Isaac was going to say, but Clara understood. It wasn't what he said that mattered. It was that he tried to say it anyway, in his pain, in his fear, even if it was just a few words. When she finished, Clara pulled the blanket back and put her hand on Isaac's wrist to check his pulse. It was weak but steady. She sighed, tired but lighter than when she had first met him in the meadow. Dusty added more wood to the stove, and the cabin lit up. He looked at Clara and said in a low voice, Do you know who he is? Clara shook her head. Dusty, slowly. I know. Or at least, I think I know. Clara turned around. You know. Dusty nodded, his eyes fixed on the fire, as if remembering something. If I'm not mistaken, he used to be an army scout, a man who carries a lot of things on his back that no one wants to carry. Clara asked softly. Do you know him? Dusty replied. Not exactly, but I've heard of him. And if it's him, we won't be the only ones who find him. Clara looked at Isaac, breathing heavily under the blanket. Fear, the kind of fear that this part of the West so naturally generates, began to rise inside her. But at the same time, something else was rising much stronger. Determination. She whispered, I won't leave him alone. Whoever is looking for him. Dusty looked at Clara for a long time. Then he simply said, Then prepare yourself, because this is far from over. Night fell over Hawkthorn Valley like a heavy blanket over the land. Outside the cabin, the wind whistled through the wooden walls, like someone sighing in the darkness. Inside Dusty Warner's small cabin, the oil lamp on the table flickered, its warm yellow light trembling as if trying to hold on to a shred of warmth in a cold, desolate world. Clara June Whitfield sat beside the bed, her hands clasped on her knees. The long day had drained her, but her eyes remained open and focused on the motionless man. He was not yet fully conscious, but his breathing was more even, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Dusty sat not far away, leaning back in his wooden chair, legs stretched out, eyes half closed, as if he were sleeping. But in reality, he was incredibly wide awake. People who had lived through war rarely slept deeply, even when they were at peace. Clara heard the crackling of the fireplace, and the faint smell of burning pine mixed with the scent of antiseptic filled the air. She gently pulled the cloth from Isaac's chest, checking to see if the bandage was soaked with more blood. Good. Better than this afternoon. She leaned back in her chair and let out a long sigh. Just then, the man on the bed stirred slightly. Clara leaned toward him. Can you hear me? She asked softly, enough so as not to alarm him. His eyelids fluttered again, then slowly opened. In the lamplight, Clara saw his eyes more clearly than when she had seen him in the meadow. A deep ash color, as if they had carried miles of wind and dust and stories that could not be named. He tried to say something, but his voice was hoarse and weak, like the sound of dry grass rustling. "Mo, where am I?" Clara put her hand gently on his shoulder to keep him from trying to sit up. "He is at Mr. Elias Warner's cabin on the edge of Hawkthorn Valley. I found him in Dustfall Meadow. He was badly injured." The man frowned, trying to piece together his memories. His breathing was rapid and ragged. Clara placed her hand on his chest, pressing gently to make him relax. "You're safe. Don't try to talk too much." Dusty stood up and limped closer. The old man's eyes lingered on the injured man's face, as if seeking confirmation. "He's awake," Dusty said. Clara looked up at Dusty, then back at the man. "What is your name?" she asked. He was silent for a moment. His gray eyes moved, as if searching for a memory hidden beneath the pain. Then he replied slowly, "Isaac. Isaac Cole. Braddock." Clara nodded. She repeated the name in her head, to remember. It sounded both strong and quiet. Dusty leaned against the table, arms crossed. "I think so. Braddock." Isaac turned his head to look at the old man, his eyes wary, though weak. Dusty continued, "Don't look at me like that. I'm not the one who wants to shoot you. I just know the name. Word travels fast in Silver Creek Junction." Isaac closed his eyes for a few seconds, as if enduring a pain older than the current wound. Clara saw the twitch in his face and realized this was more than physical pain. "You should drink some water," she said. She took a cup of warm water from the table and brought it to Isaac's lips. He tilted his head slightly and took a small sip. His hands were shaking, but his eyes never left Clara. In that moment, their eyes met. No big deal. Just a look between two people who used to endure silence as a way to survive. One lost the one he loved. One lost himself on the old roads. People like that recognize each other very quickly. No explanation needed. Isaac lowered his eyes. He whispered, "Why did you save me?" Clara put the glass of water down on the table. Her voice was as light as ashes. "Because I once let someone die in front of me, and I don't want that to happen again." Isaac closed his eyes. Clara saw his eyelids tremble, as if the answer touched something deeper than the stitched wound on his shoulder. But Dusty interrupted curtly, "You don't need to tell him your life story." Clara turned to Dusty, her voice calm. "I didn't tell him. I just told him the truth." Dusty shrugged, but something in his eyes softened. The old man understood that the truth was sometimes the only thing that would keep a man standing. Isaac tried to move his right hand. Claire placed her hand lightly on his to stop him. "Don't. Your wound will tear open," Isaac tried to ask, his voice still hoarse. "How long have I been lying down?" "Not long," Claire replied. "He was unconscious for about 3 or 4 hours." Isaac turned away, looking at the crackling fireplace. In the red light, Clara saw his face as hard as ebony and as soft as ash. The man who brought into this cabin not only a wounded body, but also a lifetime of nameless darkness. She realized the contraction in his shoulders was not because of pain, but because of reluctance to be cared for. This man is not used to someone staying over. Clara understood that feeling very well. She asked softly, "Do you remember what happened?" Isaac did not answer immediately. He stared at the ceiling, his eyes wandering back and forth in memory. Then he replied slowly, as if weighing each word. "I was ambushed. In Dry Creek Basin. There were 3 of them. I'm not sure who they were, but they knew exactly who I was." Clara felt her hands go cold. She wondered what had this man gotten himself into. Dusty pushed his hat back. "Dry Creek Basin. That's not a random ambush. Not some drunken brat." Isaac turned his head to look at Dusty. "I know. So what are you going to do?" Dusty asked, not mockingly, but genuinely curious. Isaac was silent. There was a silence so long that Clara could hear the wind outside brushing past the door. Finally, Isaac said, "I didn't mean anything. I just wanted to live one more night." Clara sensed one thing clearly. The statement was not a complaint. It was the simplest truth. She couldn't help but let out a sigh. Not tired, but relieved, because at least he was being honest with himself. Clara stood up. "You rest tonight. We'll talk more tomorrow morning." Dusty looked at her and snorted. "Did you forget that we could be found?" Clara sat down next to Isaac again, placing her hand lightly on the blanket. "If someone comes looking for us, it won't change anything tonight. We're this tired, and worrying about the future will only exhaust all three of us." Dusty looked at Clara longer than usual. Then he waved his hand. "You just do it your way." Clara smiled slightly, not happily. "Exactly, but like someone who knew it would be a long time. But at least they would be together tonight." Before standing up, Clara leaned closer to Isaac, her eyes filled with quiet tenderness. "Go to sleep." "I'm here." Isaac tried to say thank you, but his lips only moved. But Clara understood. Sometimes silence is the truest thank you. She took a wooden chair, pulled it close to the bed, put her hands on her knees, and closed her eyes. She did not sleep, just breathed evenly so Isaac could hear someone beside her. Across the room, Dusty quietly adjusted his old gun, placing it near the door. The old man said nothing more, but his eyes revealed the emotion he tried to hide. Worry and prepare, because he knew tonight's calm was just the prelude to a much bigger storm. Morning in Hawkthorn Valley never came suddenly. It crept into the cabin in a few pale streaks of light through the cracks in the door, mixed with the lingering smell of charcoal from the night before. Clara sat on the wooden chair next to Isaac's bed, her head tilted, her eyes closed but not quite asleep. She had dozed only a few times the night before, waking whenever Isaac stirred or breathed harder. The door opened softly. Dusty poked his head in, a small fire in one hand and a metal water jug in the other. "Are you awake?" he whispered. Clara opened her eyes and smiled tiredly. "I think I slept a little, but not for long." Dusty placed the water jug on the table, his eyes quickly scanning Isaac. "He's still breathing heavily. That's good." Clara stood up and stretched. "Let me make some porridge. You rest." Dusty let out a short laugh. "I have lived on strong coffee for 30 years. Don't think your porridge can weaken me." But then he sat down in his chair, put his feet up on the table, and rubbed his temples. Obviously, he hadn't slept last night either. Clara lit the stove, dropped a few handfuls of bird's nest into the pot of water, and stirred gently. The smell of hot porridge mixed with the smell of burning pine wood, making the cabin less harsh and quiet in the west. She thought of the old kitchen in Minnesota where she had cooked breakfast for her husband every day. The memory no longer broke her. It just made her heart slow a beat, like an old, gentle song. While Clara stirred the porridge on the stove, a very soft groan came from the bed. "Isaac is awake." Clara put down her spoon and stepped closer. His eyelids fluttered, then his ashen eyes opened, squinting against the light. She said, her voice warm and calm, "Good morning, Mr. Braddock. You're still with us." Isaac looked around for a few seconds, disoriented. Then he recognized the wooden roof of the cabin, the almost extinguished oil lamp, and Clara's face tilted slightly to the side. He tried to sit up, but Clara put her hand on his shoulder to stop him. "Don't. Your shoulder isn't healed yet." Isaac exhaled, his face contorted with pain, But there was something else, too. A little embarrassment. A little weakness he probably didn't want anyone to see. "Thank you," Isaac said, his voice rough from his dry throat, for staying. Clara did not answer immediately. She just pulled the blanket back and placed a warm towel around his neck. "You need to eat something," she said, "and take your medicine." Isaac looked at her a beat longer than necessary, not with gratitude, not with confusion, but with the look of someone used to no one stopping by for too long. Clara realized that, and it made her a little sad. Dusty sat a few feet away, looking at Isaac with a half-wary, half-curious gaze. "Speak when you're awake," the old man said bluntly. "Why were you ambushed? Don't tell me you went for a walk because it was cool." Isaac glanced at him, the corners of his lips curving into a tired smile. "I wasn't strolling," he said slowly. "I was chasing a group of people, and they were moving faster than I thought." Dusty propped his elbows on the table, eyes narrowing. "There aren't many shooters in Dry Creek who could ambush a scout like you. Unless—" He left the sentence unfinished. Clara recognized it as the deliberate silence of Western men, where men leave things unsaid like footprints in the sand. Isaac closed his eyes and took a breath. His voice was thick with emotion. "I served in the North Saddle Brigade as a liaison scout." Clara didn't understand the old Western armies, but she sensed the heaviness in Isaac's voice. Dusty did. "The North Saddle Brigade," Dusty muttered. "The Southridge campfire 10 years ago." The air in the cabin froze. Clara looked at Dusty, then at Isaac. She recognized a past that could tear a man apart beneath the old gray coat. Isaac whispered, "I didn't start the fire, but I couldn't stop it." He swallowed, his voice low. "On my way back to report the news, I saw 2 children running from the fire. One died in my arms, the other I couldn't save in time." Clara felt her heart sink, not because of the story, but because of Isaac's voice as he told it. It was the voice of someone who had judged himself 1,000 times. "You think that followed you here?" Dusty said, his voice not as harsh as usual. Isaac nodded slightly. "I think some people think so too." Clara understood Isaac was not only wounded by bullets, but by a past that burned worse than fire. She brought the bowl of porridge to the bedside. "You eat?" Isaac shook his head. "I can eat by myself." "You can't even lift your arm," Clara said, her voice calm as if she were just giving someone a glass of water. Isaac blushed slightly rare for a man who had traveled thousands of miles on dusty roads. Clara scooped up a spoonful, blew on it, and brought it to Isaac's lips. He hesitated for a second, then ate. Each spoonful that slid down his throat seemed to ignite a little bit of life-giving warmth. Dusty stood up and grabbed his coat. "I'm going out to look at the footprints. If there's anything strange, I'll come back." Clara looked after him, then back at Isaac. When the cabin door closed, only Isaac and Clara remained in the room. The light from the fireplace revealed his face, the deep lines around his eyes, the hard jaw, the lines of long suffering. Clara asked softly, "Are you still in a lot of pain?" Isaac replied after a few seconds. "Pain. Enough to remember. I'm alive." The statement made Clara pause. It was more of a confession than a joke. She sat down beside him, kept silent for a moment, and then said, "I used to think pain meant the end, but then I realize sometimes it's also the beginning." Isaac looked at her, his eyes blurry but focused. "Start what?" "Another way." Clara said so and let out a small breath. "I lost someone I loved, and after that, I almost didn't know what to do anymore. But then, on the days when no one knew, I realized that my silence was what kept me going." Isaac was silent. He listened, not out of curiosity, but because the story felt so much like a part of him, so much so that he was afraid to look at it directly. Clara saw that he did not answer or press her. She placed her hand on the blanket near his wrist. "Mr. Braddock, whatever you did, whatever your past, you are alive today. I found you, and I will not let anyone else die before my eyes." Isaac smiled slightly, a weak but genuine smile. "You don't owe me anything." "No," said Clara, "but I owe it to myself to not make the same mistake again." A strong wind blew into the cabin, making the door creak. Isaac closed his eyes. Something in Clara's words seemed to sink in. As Clara stood up to wash the dishes, Isaac opened his eyes and said, his voice low and as small as dust, "Thanks for staying." Clara paused for a few seconds. She didn't turn around. She just said loud enough for him to hear, "I stayed because you whispered, 'Don't worry.' And I couldn't leave someone saying that in the middle of dustfall." The silence that filled the cabin was an unspoken acknowledgement. Outside, it was getting dark. But for Isaac and Clara, the dim light from the fireplace was enough to start something they hadn't even realized yet. Evening fell slowly over Hawkthorn Valley, as if the sky were carefully covering the fragile peace of the cabin. The early night chill crept through the cracks in the planks, mixed with the soft chirping of insects in the pine forest. The fireplace in the room was still blazing, but not enough to completely dispel the feeling of loneliness that pervaded the space. Clara was folding up old bandages when she heard Dusty's heavy footsteps returning. He shouldered the door, his three-fingered hand clutching an old rifle. Dry mud coated the soles of his shoes, and his thick woolen coat was twisted at one side by the wind. Clara knew immediately something was wrong. "What did you find out there?" she asked, her voice low but calm. Dusty put the gun down on the table and brushed the dust off his hat. "Footprints. More than one. 3, maybe 4. The mud on the soles of their shoes is fresh. They must have been here a few hours before us." Clara shivered. "They looking for him?" Dusty glanced at Isaac, who lay motionless on the bed as if he hadn't heard. "Maybe, or just happened to pass by. But—" He paused. "The footprints going towards Dustfall Meadow are too close to be accidental." Clara felt her throat dry. She looked at Isaac, her hand unconsciously tightening around the scarf in her hand. Dusty continued, his voice low and serious. "If they really are looking for him, they will come back." Isaac opened his eyes. He had no idea how long he had been awake, but his gaze, deep, weary, was fixed on Dusty. "Not if," Isaac said softly. "They will come back." Clara stood still. A chill ran down her spine, not from vague fear, but because the question she had not yet asked had been answered so clearly. Dusty looked at Isaac, his voice hard. "So tell me, who wants to kill you?" And for what the hell, Isaac took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a few seconds, as if sorting through his memories, or perhaps struggling to muster up the courage to speak. Clara stepped closer, placed her hand on the bed frame, and said softly, "You don't have to tell me everything, but if you know, Mr. Warner and I can prepare better." Isaac looked at her, his eyes warming for a moment, then sinking back into deep sadness. He spoke slowly, but each word was as heavy as a stone rolling down the mountainside. "Not bandits. At least, not the kind you think." Clara and Dusty both looked on intently. Isaac continued, "They are a group that specializes in selling weapons. They were associated with some old military units after the war ended. I was ordered to keep an eye on them. And then Dusty asked, and then I found out they were dealing with deserters. I did the right thing, reported. The group was disbanded. Some were captured. But Isaac paused, his eyes opening to stare at the ceiling. A few survived. They didn't forget me. Clara placed her hand on the blanket, her eyes filled with worry. So this wound. Isaac tilted his head, the corners of his lips twitching into a pained smile. It wasn't highway robbery. They knew I was tracking weapons that disappeared in Dry Creek Basin. They ambushed me. I didn't think I would survive. Dusty sighed, as if realizing part of the bigger picture. Cowards, he muttered. They are like ghosts. Once you confront them, they will chase you to the end. Isaac did not reply. He just looked at Clara with tired eyes. I didn't drag you into this, Mrs. Whitfield. I didn't mean to, Clara interrupted. I decided to stop when I saw you lying in the meadow. It was my choice. It was not your fault. Isaac smiled slightly, but his eyes were tinged with torment. People used to say that, before they had to bury someone because of me. Clara took a half step back, not because she was afraid of Isaac, but because the words were so true. No man would say that without experiencing a loss that was painful to the core. Mr. Braddock, Clara said, her voice soft as ashes, everyone has a past, but no one is to blame for being saved. Isaac looked at her for a long time. His expression changed from hard to something hard to name, as if Clara had touched on something he had been running from for years. After applying a fresh bandage, Clara asked Dusty to help him put the pillow back under Isaac's shoulder. Cowboy winced, but didn't make a sound. As Clara applied a layer of ointment to the skin around the wound, Isaac shivered slightly. Not from pain, but from the tender care that alerted him reflexively. Clara realized that. She withdrew her hand a little and said softly, If I upset you, just say so. Isaac shook his head immediately. No, it's been so long since anyone touched me like that. The words took Clara by surprise, and her hand stopped. She looked at him, and Isaac avoided her eyes like a boy who had just said something too personal. Dusty stood beside him and snorted, Stop saying things that make women blush. Braddock. Clara chuckled, a rare laugh in the cabin that lightened the mood a bit. But behind the laughter, something still smoldered, like an ember that hadn't gone out. Isaac's confusion, and Clara's silent sympathy. After things calmed down, Dusty went out to check on the horses in the stable. The cabin door closed. Clara and Isaac were alone in the dim light. Clara sat down next to the bed. Not too close, but close enough that Isaac wouldn't see her leave. Her voice was soft. You need to rest. The injury is only partial, but your mind is tired too. Isaac looked at the ceiling, his gray eyes deepening as the firelight shone in. I ran for 10 years. Ran from the screams. Ran from the eyes of the dead. Ran from myself. Clara's heart sank as she listened. She knew the feeling all too well. She asked softly, Have you ever thought about stopping? Isaac closed his eyes. A man like me has no place to stop. Clara shook her head. Not true. You are lying here today. That means you stopped for the night. Isaac opened his eyes and looked at Clara. A look so real, so human. His voice almost echoed from his chest. And what if stopping puts you in danger? Clara didn't blink. Mr. Braddock, I have lived through the most painful thing in my life. The rest. I am no longer afraid. Isaac's face wavered. He tried to say something, but his lips only moved. Clara stood up, pulled the covers over him, and adjusted the pillow beneath his head. The firelight illuminated her face, bringing out a gentle firmness Isaac had never seen in anyone else. Go to sleep, said Clara. Tomorrow. We'll talk about it. Isaac looked at her for a few more seconds. When Clara turned away, he whispered very softly, as if afraid his voice would break whatever had just begun to form between them. "Clara?" She turned back. "Thank?" Clara nodded. "You being alive tomorrow morning is enough to thank." And it was the first time in years that Isaac Cole Braddock let himself fall asleep without trying to fight it off. Dawn in Hawkthorn Valley is not a sweet thing. It does not flow from the sky like honey, nor spread gold over the meadows as it does in more peaceful climes. Here, dawn is like a withered old man, slowly emerging from the night, carrying with it the cold and weariness of the land. Clara heard the first sound of wind through the cabin roof, a dry, cold sound, like the sigh of earth and rocks. She opened her eyes. She had dozed off last night in the chair beside Isaac's bed, her head propped up against the armrest, her hands still half outstretched, protective. The dim light coming through the crack in the door made the room hazy. Clara stood up and walked slowly to the small window. The fog was so thick that she could see nothing but the thin white curtain. Behind her, Isaac stirred, groaning softly. Clara turned back immediately and walked to the bedside. "Are you okay?" Her voice was warm, but a little hoarse from lack of sleep. Isaac opened his eyes, blinking to adjust to the dim light. His breathing was deeper and more even than yesterday, but still carried the heaviness of someone who had not yet recovered. "Okay, enough to know it's morning," he said, his voice still hoarse but stronger than before. Clara pulled the warm towel and placed it on his neck. "He has a slight fever, but that's normal after blood loss." Isaac looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to piece something together in his mind. Then he said, "Were you up all night?" Clara smiled slightly. "I'm going to sleep a little. Don't worry." Low Isaac curled his lips. "I can't remember the last time anyone used that word to me." Clara didn't reply, just looked at him with a look that made Isaac turn away, not because he was avoiding her, but because it had been so long since he could bear the tenderness directed towards him. The cabin door swung open. Dusty entered, his shoes still damp with dew. He brushed off his hat, his face as taut as a bowstring. Clara immediately noticed something unusual. "What did you find out there?" Dusty did not answer immediately. He walked to the table, put down the gun, and then said last night's footprints were heading this way. Clara held her breath. "Are you sure?" Dusty nodded. "There were at least 2, maybe 3. They went around the back of the cliff, away from the main trail. One of them left deep boot prints, meaning he was carrying a heavy weapon." Clara looked toward the bed. Isaac had his eyes closed, as if what Dusty said didn't surprise him. Dusty frowned. "Braddock, you said last night they were coming back. What do you know about their plans?" Isaac opened his eyes slowly, his voice low. "They always come in small groups. They never meet directly during the day. They use the night or dawn. And before they attack, they always scout." Finding the way Clara asked, Isaac nodded, his eyes darkening. "They need to know where you are, who you're with, and how many people can fight back." Dusty tightened his grip on his gun. "So that means they saw us." Isaac did not answer. He just stared into the fireplace, the firelight casting shadows across his tired face. Clara put her hands on the bed frame. "We have to get out of here now." Dusty shook his head. "Where to Isaac can't ride. If he tries to walk, his wound will tear again, and the road to town is more than 3 miles. If they ambush us halfway, we'll all be dead." Clara bit her lip. She hated feeling cornered and out of options. "So, what do we do?" she asked, looking at Dusty, then at Isaac. Dusty crossed his arms over his chest. "We wait." "Wait." Clara was surprised. "Yeah," Dusty said. "They always think wounded people run. They don't think we're stupid enough to stay here." Clara frowned. "Is that the plan?" "No," Dusty replied coolly, "but it's the only thing we have." Isaac chuckled. His laugh was like rotten wood in the wind tired, but true. "The old man is right," said Isaac. Clara sat down beside the bed. "You don't object?" Isaac looked at her, his eyes for the first time in days holding something resembling determination. "I've been running for 10 years, and now maybe stopping is the only option left." Clara looked into his eyes. There was the exhaustion of someone who had faced too much pain. But beneath that exhaustion was something else. A piece of will still burns, even though it is almost extinguished. Clara went to the back of the cabin and opened the wooden bucket to get some water. Her hands were covered in morning dew. As she poured water into the pot, she glanced at the distant cliff. The white mist was thick. The silence was not peaceful. It was like a stage curtain waiting for the villain to come out. She took a deep breath. Her mind flashed to her late husband, Jack Whitfield, who had said, "June, sometimes being silent is a way of standing up." Clara closed her eyes. Maybe today is the time she understood that saying better. In the cabin, Dusty cleaned his rifle, checking each round. Isaac watched his every movement, wincing occasionally as pain shot through his shoulder. "When can you get up?" Dusty asked without raising his head. "I don't know," Isaac replied. "Maybe this afternoon, maybe in a few days." Dusty gasped. "We don't have a few days." Isaac squinted, looking at his legs under the blanket. "I will try to stand." Clara walked in just in time to hear that. "You can't," she said firmly. "The wound is fresh." Isaac looked at her gently but firmly. "If you can't stand, you'll die." Clara stood still for a few seconds. She wanted to protest, to say that he had to rest, that she would protect him, that no one was allowed to die here. But she had lived with a strong man, and she knew when to let go and let him make his own choices. Finally, she just said, "So, you stand when I say you can. No sooner." Isaac smiled softly, surprised by the determination in the seemingly gentle, quiet woman. "I didn't think you were that good at giving orders." "You haven't seen me sweep the yard yet," Clara replied, making Dusty laugh out loud. The cabin air lightened, if only for a moment. A moment later, when Dusty went behind the house to rekindle the fire, Isaac called Clara back in a very low voice. "Miss Whitfield?" Clara stopped and turned to face him. Isaac looked at her with eyes as quiet as the afternoon shadow. "Last night, I thought I wouldn't wake up. I thought it was the end." Clara did not reply. She only stepped closer. Isaac continued, his voice slow but clear. "If you hadn't found me, I would have died in the grass with no one knowing my name." Clara placed her hands on the edge of the bed, her voice low and warm. "I won't let that happen." Isaac swallowed hard, then asked, "Why a stranger like me?" Clara looked at him, her eyes unwavering, unavoidably. "Because I understand the feeling of wanting to give up, but still hoping for someone to tell you that it's not the end of the road." Isaac looked down, his hand curled slightly under the blanket. She continued, her voice as soft as ashes falling from coal, and because he whispered, "Don't worry. A person who is afraid of others worrying about him is someone who doesn't deserve to be abandoned." A long silence fell over the two. Isaac opened his mouth, about to say something, but the sound outside the door interrupted everything. The sound of rocks crunching, footsteps, someone slow, heavy breathing. Dusty rushed into the cabin, his face full of tension. "They are here." The footsteps outside the cabin grew clearer by the second. They were not the sounds of wild animals, nor of rocks falling from the cliffs. They were heavy, deep footsteps, deliberately hidden, but still audible enough for anyone to hear someone was watching. Clara stood frozen. Her hand was still on the edge of Isaac's bed, but her heart was pounding so hard she could feel her chest vibrating with each beat. Dusty crouched low, hunched over, and signaled for silence. He blew out the oil lamp with a wave of his hand, leaving the cabin in the pale red glow of the fireplace. Darkness fell instantly, thick as a heavy blanket covering every corner. "Stay there," Dusty whispered to Clara and Isaac. His voice was as small as falling coal, but full of weight. Isaac tried to push himself up with his right hand, but the sharp pain in his left shoulder made him stifle a groan. Clara put her hand lightly on his chest. "Don't! You'll tear the stitches." Isaac gritted his teeth. "If they come in, I can't stay still." Clara looked at him, her eyes deep and calm. The calm came from experienced fear, not spontaneous courage. "You will stand when I tell you to stand." Isaac was about to argue, but Dusty turned back, signaling, "Both of you shut up now." The footsteps stopped somewhere behind the cabin. Then a man's voice came through, hoarse and with a Western accent. "Elias Warner. I know you're in there." Dusty paused. Clara heard Isaac's breathing stop for a beat. The other voice continued, as if in no hurry. "We just want to talk." "There's no reason to hide," Dusty whispered. "They know my name." Isaac closed his eyes for a second. "They know better than that." Outside the cabin, the sound of boots stepping on dry branches echoed. The man continued, "Braddock, if you're alive, come out. We have something that belongs to you." Clara shivered slightly. It wasn't a threat. It was worse, the tone of a predator accustomed to prey appearing when cornered. Dusty leaned over to the small window and squinted through the crack. The morning mist was so thick he could only make out the vague outlines of two men standing outside, each keeping a cautious stance as if not wanting to be too visible. Dusty turned back, his voice low. "Two, maybe three, but at least two are clearly standing in front of the door." Isaac tried to sit up a little higher. "What does it look like, tall?" Dusty replied. One was about 6 feet tall, carrying a long rifle. The other was shorter, but seemed to be of a larger build. Isaac nodded slightly. "That group." Clara clutched the front of her shirt. She didn't know much about shooting or Western skirmishes, but she did know one thing. Isaac and Dusty's silence spoke volumes that went beyond what their words said. There was a knock at the door. Bang! 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 The tapping was deliberately slow, not hurried. The tapping of someone who knew the person inside was afraid and used his calmness to stir that fear deeper. "Warner," the man's voice continued, "we know your cabin is isolated. We also know you're not the type to be scared." A short silence. "But you don't have to die for Braddock. We just need him, and what he took." Clara looked at Isaac immediately. "Take. What did they say?" she asked softly. Isaac did not look at her. "I took nothing from them." Dusty glanced at Isaac. "Are you serious?" Isaac was silent long enough for Dusty to understand that the truth was more complicated than denial. Outside, the sound of rustling shoes echoed again. The tall man continued, "Isaac Braddock, if you're breathing, come out. We'll leave the others alone." Clara looked at Isaac for a long time. Her voice was as soft as mist. "They want you out." Isaac chuckled, a dry, bitter laugh. "I stepped out, only to be shot immediately." Clara opened her mouth to speak, but Dusty put a finger to her lips, signaling silence. The old man straightened and walked to the door, but did not touch it. Dusty's voice echoed, as solid as rock. "If you want to talk, stand 2 steps away from the door and put down your guns." There was silence for a few seconds outside. Then a small, short laugh echoed through the mist. Old Man Warner. You still like to give orders like in the army. Huh. Dusty's expression did not change. Put down the gun. No, the man replied immediately, his voice stiff. But we are willing to negotiate. Isaac narrowed his eyes. They don't negotiate, he whispered to Clara. They're saying that to get Dusty to show his face. Clara feared that more than anything. She looked out at the cliffs behind the cabin. The fog was still thick. She could see nothing, but it was the nothingness that was most frightening. She whispered, There are more than 3 of them. Right. Isaac nodded slightly. I'd guess at least 4, maybe 5. Clara swallowed. She looked at the door, then at Isaac. If they get into the cabin, Isaac interrupted, then I won't let them touch you. Clara felt her eyes sting without knowing why, but she didn't let them come. Not now. Outside. The man's voice rang out again. Braddock. 5 more minutes. If not, we're coming in. Dusty closed the magazine of his gun. Don't let them in. Isaac tried to lift himself up with his right hand, gritting his teeth in pain. I have to stand. If they come in, I won't have a chance. Dusty turned around. If you stand now, you will fall before they can shoot. Clara placed her hand on Isaac's shoulder, her voice hard for the rare time. You can't stand. At least not yet. Isaac looked at her hand on his shoulder. It was cold with frost, but warm with will. He saw himself reflected in it, an exhausted self that still wanted to fight. I can't let you 2 die because of me, he said, his voice very small. Clara squeezed his shoulder. You are not allowed to decide that for us. Dusty nodded vigorously. She's right. Outside. The sound of guns being loaded echoed. Clara felt her heart being squeezed. Isaac bowed his head for a moment, as if struggling with himself. Then he looked up. We'll do as you say. It wasn't surrender. It was the first time Isaac allowed himself to believe in someone else. Dusty raised his gun. All right. We have 5 minutes. Get the wooden table and push it to the door. Clara, you close the window latch. Braddock Isaac interrupted. Give me your Colt. Dusty looked at him a long time. Then he placed the old, age-blackened pistol in Isaac's hand. Isaac grasped it with his right hand, the only hand he could use. His eyes changed color, deep, calm, cold, and determined. Clara looked at Isaac in that moment. Not the wounded man, not the man running from the past, but as the one who has survived the storms no one can bear. That man just came back. And outside the cabin, the enemy had begun to approach. The footsteps outside the cabin grew heavier like hail on the roof. The morning mist was still thick, both shielding the cabin and making everything around it seem more sinister. None of the 3, Clara, Isaac. Dusty had a clue where the stranger was, but they could feel the danger closing in on the small space like a rope strangling an animal at the end of a road. Dusty pushed the large wooden table up against the door. The legs scraped nervously against the floor. Clara secured the window with a long wooden bar, her hand shaking slightly, but her movements sure. Isaac sat back in bed, the Colt steady in his right hand. Though pain still radiated from his left shoulder, his eyes were different, deep, alert, not as tired as before. In the cabin, the fireplace was still burning softly, the firelight casting 3 shadows on the wooden wall like 3 silhouettes waiting for some kind of judgment from heaven and earth. Outside, the man's voice rang out again. Braddock, we count to 10. Dusty gritted his teeth. Dogs. They want to force us out. Clara stood in the middle of the cabin, her hands on her handkerchief, her eyes calm but deep, like someone who had lived a long life with unnameable losses. She looked at Isaac. "Can you tell me the truth? What do they want you for? Something important enough to bring armed men to surround Mr. Warner's cabin?" Isaac looked down at the gun, then back at Clara. A hint of weariness crossed his eyes. But when he spoke, his voice was clear. "I found out where they hid a shipment of weapons. Something that, if it got out of New Mexico, would kill more than a few people." Dusty frowned. "What kind of goods?" Isaac shook his head. "I haven't had time to confirm everything, but it's enough for them to want to kill everyone who knows about it." Clara didn't blink. "And you took something from them," Isaac said softly. "I got the map with the recipient list." Dusty opened his eyes wide. "Good God," Isaac continued. "I hid it 10 miles away, in a rock crevice near Southridge. They haven't found it yet, so they need me." Clara heard and just let out a long sigh. Her voice was soft. "So the reason they want you isn't just for revenge?" The fire reflected in Isaac's eyes. "No, they want silence. The silence of the dead." Clara looked straight at him, not afraid, but as if reading the page of an old book. The look in her eyes made Isaac suddenly feel a gasp. A nameless feeling, before he could understand it, was pulled deep down, outside the cabin. A man's voice rang out, heavy as a rock. "One!" Dusty grabbed his gun. Isaac lifted Colt up, his right hand shaking slightly. Clara didn't take her eyes off the door, but she could feel Isaac's eyes on her. "Miss Whitfield?" Clara started slightly and turned to him. Isaac said softly, his voice almost a whisper, "If I die, burn the map. Don't give it to anyone." Clara shook her head without hesitation, without second thought. "I will not let you die." "Someone like me," Isaac began. Clara interrupted. "You don't get to decide that for yourself." For a split second, their eyes met, and Isaac saw something in her eyes, something he hadn't seen in a long time. Faith. A light but strong faith. Like a soft leather rein, but enough to hold a panicked horse. Outside, the countdown rang out. 2. Dusty turned, pressing his ear against the wooden wall. "Ich! There's another one moving around behind," he said softly. Clara turned to look at Isaac. He nodded slightly. They didn't need to say more. All three understood that time was ticking away like sand in a clock. "Not 4. The count echoed out word by word, slowly, deliberately. Dusty whispered, "When they get to 10, they'll break down the door." Isaac looked at the wooden table blocking the door. That table can only take one hit. The second hit will break the table leg. Clara felt her hand go cold, but she did not back away. Year 6. Outside came the rustle of boots on rubble. There was a clang of metal, perhaps someone cocking a gun. Dusty Key sang, "Clara, when they come in, you stand behind me. Don't stand near the door. Braddock, you squat down. Keep your gun pointed at the air." Isaac nodded, his right hand gripping the gun until his knuckles turned white. Clara asked softly, "Dusty, are you sure they didn't shoot at the cabin from a distance?" Dusty lowered his voice. "If they wanted to shoot, they would have. What they wanted was to take Braddock alive." Isaac took a deep breath. Clara sensed layers of emotion in the breath, pain, exhaustion, but also preparation, like someone who had walked the line between life and death many times and knew fear was only allowed after it was over. 7. 8. Every sound was strangely clear now, the crackling of the fire, the wind through the roof, even Clara's heart pounding in her chest. She looked at Isaac. He looked back at her, and in that moment, no one said a word, but they both knew if they survived this morning, the silence would leave its mark on both of them. like a thin but deep cut, ripe. Dusty raised his gun to his shoulder. Isaac raised the Colt, his hand shaking slightly, but his eyes eerily steady. Clara clutched the edge of the towel. Taking a deep breath, outside, the man said the last sentence before counting to 10. "Warner, don't be foolish. We only take what is ours." Dusty growled softly, not letting the sound escape his throat, but Clara heard it clearly. "What belongs to you is crime." The man's voice rose. 10! Boom! A loud crash into the door shook the whole cabin. The wooden table tilted a little, but did not break. "Hold on," Dusty shouted softly. "The second impact is about to hit." Isaac tightened his grip on the gun, tilted his head to Clara, and whispered, "When the door broke." She backed up against the left wall. Clara opened her mouth to protest, but Isaac spoke again. "I need to know you're safe." That sentence in a moment of chaos seemed to erase the sound of wind, fog, and gunfire. The second crash is coming. The door started to crack, and just then, from the pine forest behind the cabin, came a deafening boom of collapsing rock and earth. Everything stops. Loud sound of breaking rocks. Someone shouted, "There's someone behind. He's in the back of the cabin." Dusty opened his eyes wide. Not them. Isaac tried to stand up, leaning against the bed. Clara gasped. "So," who Isaac looked through the crack of the door. His eyes narrowed like a knife. "Not anyone. One person." Clara looked at him. "Person," Isaac replied, his voice low and tinged with disbelief. "The person I thought died 10 years ago." The moment the loud crash of rocks echoed from behind the cabin seemed to stop time. Even the wind outside the valley seemed to stop for a beat. Everything was dead silent, except for the ragged breathing of the people surrounding the cabin and the pounding heartbeats of the 3 people inside. Isaac was still leaning against the bed, clutching the Colt. His face was pale with pain, but his eyes were brighter than at any time since Clara had found him in Dustfall Meadow. There was confusion in them, but also an old pain, a silent pain that time could not erase. Clara touched his arm lightly. Who is this person you are talking about?" Isaac kept his eyes on the door. "The person I saw die in front of me 10 years ago." Dusty tightened his grip on the gun. "You mean someone rose from the grave?" Isaac shook his head very slowly. "Not resurrected. It was me who was wrong, or I was tricked." Outside, the pursuers began to scream in chaos. A shout rang out. "He's behind you. Keep your distance." Isaac tilted his head, listening closely. A flash of recognition flashed in his eyes, as thin as a knife and as sharp as the summer sun piercing through the forest. He whispered, almost to himself, "Jonah." Clara was startled. "Jonah, you know that man?" Isaac closed his eyes and breathed softly but deeply, as if suppressing a memory he had forgotten Jonah Hale. "My old comrade, my best friend in the North Saddle Brigade." Clara looked at Dusty, seeing the old man blink in disbelief. "I thought Jonah died in the Southridge residential fire," Dusty said. Isaac laughed dryly. "I thought so too. I was standing there. I pulled him out of the rubble, but he wasn't breathing. I had to leave him." Clara felt a squeeze in her chest as she heard this. Isaac spoke the words not in a narrative tone, but with such a quiet pain that she could feel it permeate the entire cabin. "Why is he alive?" Dusty asked. Isaac opened his eyes, his gaze dark as ashes. "Because maybe he's not dead, or someone made me think so." Clara suddenly understood. When someone thinks they've abandoned you, that feeling eats at them for life. And Isaac had lived with that for 10 years. The footsteps from behind the cabin became clearer. The pursuers in front of the cabin also fell silent, as if they were waiting for someone to appear. Then a man's voice, low, hoarse, but very clear, resounded from behind. "Through the wooden wall, Isaac. I know you're in there." Clara tightened her grip on her handkerchief. She didn't know the man, but there was something in the voice, not exactly hatred. It was like a call from afar, like the echo of a memory still bleeding. Isaac closed his eyes. His hand holding the gun shook, but not with fear, but because of memories. "Jonah," he whispered, "you live." The voice outside continued. "You were fooled, Isaac, and so was I. 10 years, and now they want you as the final straw." Dusty tilted his head and muttered, "They are. That means the arms dealer group." Jonah answered immediately, as if he had heard, "They use both of us. I live because they need someone to take the blame for them. Isaac lives because they need someone to blame when things get out." Isaac tilted his head slightly, frowning but unable to hide his shock. "Why? Why didn't you come back? Why did you disappear?" A sigh came from the back of the cabin. "Because they captured me. Because they needed me to stay quiet. And because if I came to you, we would both be dead from that year on." Clara looked at Isaac. She saw something, broken in his eyes, that no one else could see but her, because she had seen that same emotion in the mirror. So many years ago, the day her husband had walked into the shipyard and never emerged again. Jonah's voice continued, low and heavy as stone. "Isaac, you are injured. You cannot go, but you must listen to me." The silence in the cabin grew thick. Isaac leaned back in his bed, eyes open, but his gaze seemed to pierce through wood, through mist, through time. "Jonah," his voice choked, "I'm sorry." Clara saw Dusty turn away to avoid facing such a private moment. But Jonah replied, "It's not your fault. They're out there because of the map, because of the list, and because you're the only one who knows where it's hidden." Then Jonah's voice became sharper, almost commanding. "Don't open the door. Don't show them you're weak. You have to hold on until I pull them away." Isaac blinked. "You are alone. There are many of them." Jonah laughed, a short, hoarse, but strangely lively laugh. "Isaac, have you forgotten who I used to be?" Dusty frowned. "We must not let him distract us with recklessness," he said softly. But Clara sensed something else. Jonah didn't sound like someone desperate to kill himself. He sounded like someone finally getting where he needed to be after a decade of running in the dark. Clara whispered to Isaac, "Do you believe him?" Isaac looked at her, his eyes softening for a moment. "I want to believe, more than anything." The words were so true that Clara found herself choking a little. Outside, a sudden shout rang out, "He's behind, shoot!" Then the sound of gunfire echoed in the mist. Clara's heart skipped a beat. Isaac propped himself up with his hands, trying to stand up. Jonah Dusty pushed Isaac back. "You can't stand. You can't hit anyone from here outside the cabin door." 3 more shots rang out. People screamed. Rocks rolled. Boots stampeded. Then silence. Clara held her breath. Isaac looked out the window as if trying to pierce through the white mist. Dusty leaned in the door. He said only one sentence. "One man is running west. The other 4 are chasing him. The one in the lead must be Jonah." Clara touched Isaac's shoulder. He looked at her, his eyes red, not from crying, but from a mixture of guilt and hope. "You can't go out," Clara said softly. "You'll die before you see him." Isaac bowed his head, his hands clasped in his lap. "I owe him a life." Clara touched his wrist lightly, a touch like a fragile warmth in the middle of winter. "And you're alive, which means you have a chance to repay your debt." Isaac looked up, his gray eyes fixed on Clara for a long moment. There was a silence, as if the whole cabin had stopped breathing. Then he said, "Thank you, Clara." His voice was not trembling, but deep, very deep. Dusty closed the window and locked it. "These two talk forever and never get into trouble," he said curtly, but he could not hide the worry underneath. "They will come back, and Jonah will lead them as far as he can." Isaac asked, "How long did it take them to get back to the cabin?" Dusty calculated. "Maybe an hour, maybe earlier." Clara looked at Isaac, her voice soft but firm. "You need to settle down before you think about leaving here." Isaac tilted his head. A tired but warm smile crossed his lips. "I don't think I have the right to argue with a woman like you." Clara smiled. "Yes." Dusty crossed his arms. "We have exactly 1 hour to decide. Either leave the cabin or turn the cabin into a fortress." Isaac leaned against the bed, his eyes returning to the depth of one who had crossed a desert of bullets and fire. He said, "Don't leave. Don't abandon the cabin. Jonah might come back for us." Clara nodded. "Then we stay." Isaac looked at her. His gaze was silent, but there was something about it that was no longer the same. It has faith. Outside, the fog was as thick as it had been when Clara first entered Dustfall Meadow, but no one in the cabin felt as alone as before, because they know someone from the past has come back to life. An old grudge has returned, and an invisible thread is connecting 3 people, Clara, Isaac, Jonah, to a common path whose outcome no one can yet see. The cabin grew so quiet that Clara could hear the wood crackling under Dusty's hands as he added more to the fire. The flickering flames cast a golden glow on Isaac's face, highlighting the rough, deep lines worn by time and the desert. Outside, the mist was still white, spreading like a mourning scarf over Hawkthorn Valley. No one said anything for a long time. Clara sensed this silence differently. It wasn't just a space between dangers, but a space between things no one dared to tell. A silence with weight. In the end, it was Dusty who broke it first. "We have about 45 minutes before they gather." His voice was curt, but he couldn't hide his anxiety. Isaac nodded, slowly and softly, as if making a decision with each breath. He tried to sit up straighter, but the pain pulled at his shoulder, making him wince. Clara immediately went to his side. "Don't try too hard. The stitches aren't right yet," she whispered. Isaac looked at her for a few seconds, his gray eyes deeper than the fire. "I can't lie here while Jonah is risking his life for me," Clara replied immediately, without a tremor. "You're not lying here. You're alive, and living to fight is the only way to help Jonah." Isaac paused. Something flashed across his eyes. Respect, gratitude, and something less easily named. Dusty sighed and put the pot of hot water on the stove. "We must be prepared. If they come back in larger numbers, this cabin will be overwhelmed." He glanced at Isaac. "I can shoot with one hand, but the accuracy won't be great. Clara, you stay on the left wall like before." Clara nodded, but her mind was not still. Despite her efforts to remain calm, her heart was beating faster than usual, not only because of the danger outside, but also because of what Isaac had said while the fog still surrounded the cabin. "I owe him my life." The way he said it, with the pain he had endured for 10 years, made Clara feel a pang in her chest. She took the towel and sat down next to him. 10 long years. You carried that guilt in your heart. Isaac turned his head slightly to look at her. "Yes." A short reply, but as deep as a cut. Clara placed a towel on his shoulder, wiping away the blood that had seeped through the bandage. "No one can live peacefully with such a burden," she said. "But he survived. He kept going." Isaac pursed his lips. "I'm not sure if that's living or just self-punishment." Clara stopped. A breeze came through the window, making the old curtains flutter. "You say that, but you were trying to protect us," she said. "A man so tired that he wanted to give up would do something like that. Isaac turned to her fully. Do you really think I'm worth living for? After all, Clara did not avoid that gaze, a gaze that once belonged to a man who bore a wound larger than flesh, a wound of the soul. Yes, she said softly, I think you're worth it. For a second, Isaac's eyes wavered. Something incredible was rising inside him. Belief in himself. Clara felt a sudden lump in her throat, but she did not turn away. There were things that did not need to be said, but had to be seen. Dusty cleared his throat, breaking the private moment. I'll go out behind the cabin for a moment. See if there are any fresh footprints. Clara immediately stood up. It's dangerous for you to go alone. They might be waiting. Dusty waved his hand. I know them better than you think. I won't go far. Just checking. He put on his coat, grabbed his gun, and opened the back door, a small door, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. When Dusty disappeared into the mist, the cabin was left with only two people, Clara and Isaac. And suddenly, the silence became different. No fear, no stress. But it was a strange feeling of tenderness, even though the circumstances were not gentle at all. Isaac sighed, leaning his head lightly against the bed wall. I didn't tell you everything, he said, his voice deeper and hoarse. I didn't tell you because I was afraid to look at the truth. Clara sat down beside him again. You don't owe me a word, she said. But I owe it to myself, Isaac replied. He squeezed the Colt lightly, as if it would help him keep his courage. Jonah wasn't just my teammate, Isaac said. He was someone I considered a brother to, someone I trusted, more than anyone. Clara nodded slightly, not pushing. Isaac continued, his voice low. 10 years ago, we went into Southridge to track down arms dealers, but someone in the unit betrayed us, left Jonah to his death. Clara took Isaac's hand naturally, without hesitation. He paused. The touch was like a deep breath after a suffocation. I believe it was my fault that Jonah died, because I didn't listen to him, because I chose the wrong path. Clara squeezed his hand. You didn't kill him. I left him, Isaac whispered. I left him when he was no longer breathing. Clara looked deep into his eyes, filled with an obsession that no one shared. Her voice was soft as the first thin layer of snow, but he lived to have a chance to make amends, and today he would abandon no one again. Isaac closed his eyes slightly, and Clara saw a slight tremble in the corner of his eye, as if what she said hit him where he held him tightest. Dusty reopened the door, startling them both. He brushed the frost from his hat and said hoarsely, Too bad. They're not chasing Jonah anymore. Clara was stunned. What do you mean? Dusty took a deep breath. They've split up. 3 are going along the west side of the gorge. 2 are around the left side of the cabin. They're regrouping to attack again. Isaac immediately tried to stand up. We have to leave the cabin. Clara rolled her eyes. In this condition, she looked at his wounded shoulder. You can't walk half a mile, Isaac growled. I won't let you die because of me. Dusty raised his hand. No one died today, but we must leave the cabin before they completely surround us. Clara looked out the window only white. Is it safer to go out? In the fog, she asked. Dusty shrugged. Nothing is safe, but a little cabin in the middle of a valley. It's a trap. Isaac got halfway up and then collapsed. Clara caught him. Slow down. You can't force your way through this. Isaac bowed his head, his breath fanning over her hair. They were close enough that Clara could hear his heart beating slow, heavy, but steady. He said very softly, I was just afraid of hurting you, Clara replied, her voice unshaken. I won't leave you behind, just like you won't leave anyone else." Dusty looked at both of them and clicked his tongue. "Okay, enough talking. If we want to live, we have to go now." He opened the old map and spread it on the table. "There's a little path that skirts the edge of Hawkthorn Gorge. Little is known about it. If we take it, we might be able to cut them off." Isaac nodded. "I know that road, but it's narrow and steep." Clara helped him. "We can go. Just lean on me." A moment of hesitation passed. Then Isaac nodded slowly, but sincerely. Dusty put on his coat and loaded his gun. "Let's go. Don't let the ghosts of the past decide our future." Clara adjusted Isaac's scarf. "Can you stand?" Isaac looked at her, his eyes filled with trust for the first time since they met. "Only when you walk beside me." Clara smiled slightly. "Then let's go." Dusty opened the back door of the cabin. A blast of cold air rushed in, carrying with it a mist as thick as unmelted snow. Clara instinctively raised her hand to shield her face. The mist was so thick she could only see a few feet ahead. Behind them, the cabin was silent, as if taking a final, abandoned breath. Isaac stepped out first, or rather stepped out with Clara's help. He tried to stand, his right hand lightly gripping her arm. The touch was both support and an admission that he could not hide his weakness. Clara said nothing, just pulled his arm around her shoulder, a firm yet gentle anchor keeping her from collapsing. Dusty walked ahead, gun slung over his shoulder, moving quickly but making no sound. "Stay close together. Don't separate," he said, his voice low but audible. Clara nodded slightly, though Dusty didn't look back. She squeezed Isaac's hand. "Lean on me. I can take any weight." Isaac tried to smile, though his breathing was still rapid. "I don't want you to have to work hard," Clara replied softly. "Sometimes letting others help is also a powerful way." Isaac was silent, and that was the sign he understood. They followed the narrow path that ran alongside Hawkthorn Gorge. The tall rocks stood on either side like two natural walls, cold and rough. Their feet stepped on the damp stones, the sound of their footsteps almost drowned out by the mist. Clara could hear her heart pounding and Isaac's heavy breathing beside her. After a while, she asked softly, "Does your shoulder hurt a lot?" Isaac inhaled sharply, gritting his teeth in pain. "I can take it." Clara shook her head. "You always say that, but your endurance makes others worry more than reassure them." He tilted his head slightly towards her. "Are you always this straightforward?" Clara replied softly. "Only when it is necessary." There was a moment of silence. Then Isaac spoke, his voice so low that only Clara could hear. "I feel reassured." Clara paused. She hadn't expected a man like Isaac rough, experienced, strong enough to hide all emotions to say that. She did not answer, but the hand that held him tightened. Dusty stopped suddenly. He raised a hand for silence. Both Clara and Isaac froze. In the mist below in the valley, only a few dozen yards away, there was the sound of rolling stones. Then someone growled, "You guys search carefully. He's injured. He can't have gone far." The voice echoed on the wind, as clear as if it were standing right next to me. Clara held her breath. Dusty turned his head and whispered, "They're starting to sweep the slopes. We must speed up." Isaac gritted his teeth. "I could try." Clara held him back. "No, don't make the wound worse." Isaac lowered his voice. "If they catch us, you won't just have to fear my wounds." Clara looked straight at him. Her eyes did not tremble, only had the strange determination of someone who had suffered much pain and knew how to stand up. "If I were afraid, I wouldn't be here with you." Isaac choked. Dusty signaled again. "No, this way is still safe." They continued along the path, The path narrowed. On one side was a sheer cliff. On the other was a mist-shrouded abyss. A cold wind blew gently against their faces, carrying the smell of damp earth and weeds. Isaac breathed heavily. Clara could hear him fighting back the pain. Every step he took was a private battle. "I slowed you down," Isaac said softly, his voice sour with self-reproach. Clara shook her head. "No. I'm going the speed we need to go. Isaac," Clara interrupted, "don't apologize for something you didn't mean to do. And don't apologize for surviving." Isaac looked at her for the first time, as if those words touched a part of him that no one else had ever touched. He said very softly, "Has anyone ever told you that you are stronger than you believe?" Clara smiled slightly, a smile that was sad and warm at the same time. "No, but I don't need anyone to tell me. I learned it myself, by losing people I love." Isaac looked at her for a long, long time. There was a soft sympathy in his eyes for the first time that wasn't one of fear or duty. It was one of understanding. Suddenly a call from below startled all three. "I see the footprints." "They're going west," Dusty swore under his breath. "They found the trail." "Hurry!" Isaac tried to speed up, but his legs gave way. Clara caught him, but the weight made her sway a little. Isaac gasped, I didn't want to make you fall." Clara held him tight. "If we fall together." He looked at her in the mist. The moment made his chest tighten in a different way, not physically, but emotionally he hadn't felt in years. Dusty continued to lead the way. After a while, he stopped at a crevice in the rocks just wide enough for a man to squeeze through. "We'll hide here," he said. "This alley is deep. We can avoid sight." Isaac nodded. Clara helped him in first. The ice-cold crevice was lit by dim light. The wind outside blew in like a soft howl, like the sigh of the Rocky Mountain. Clara sat Isaac down on a flat stone. "Lean here," she said. Isaac breathed heavily, his whole body shaking slightly from the pain. Clara used a towel to wipe the sweat from his forehead. He took her wrist, very lightly. "Clara, aren't you scared?" She looked at him, her eyes slow and deep like summer well water. "I'm scared, but I've survived worse fears than a gun to my head." Isaac tilted his head, as if to hear better. Clara whispered, "I lost my husband in silence. No gunshots, no goodbyes. One day he just walked away and never came back." Isaac squeezed her hand, not to ask for help this time, but to share. Clara continued, "When he died, I thought I had lost the rest of my life. But then, I learned this: sometimes silence is not the end. It is the opportunity to start again." Isaac took a deep breath, his voice low. "I'm also trying to start over, but I'm scared." Clara touched his cheek lightly. It was such a natural action that neither of them was startled. "Everyone is afraid when they stand before something they want to keep," she said. "Afraid of losing it again, afraid of being hurt again. But that very fear shows that we are alive." Isaac looked at her as if he saw the entire path before him, a path he never thought he had the right to walk. "What if I want to keep something?" Isaac asked hoarsely. Clara replied slowly, "So don't let it slip away." A shout from outside brought them both back to reality. "There are boot prints leading into the crevice." "They're right here," Dusty cursed softly, putting the gun to the crack's mouth. "Both of you, move back inside. Isaac, keep Colt ready. Clara, stay low." Clara quickly pulled Isaac back into the darkness. He whispered Clara. "If something bad happens," she put her finger to his lips. "No, don't have the last word. We'll get through this, together." Isaac trembled slightly, not from pain, but from emotion that was stronger than any injury. "I believe you," he said, Clara whispered. "Good, because I trust you too." Outside, footsteps ran. Dusty turned his head, gritting his teeth. Ready! They're here! White mist filled the alley mouth. A figure appeared outside, and the next confrontation begins. The wind whistled through the mouth of the gorge as if someone were pulling a thick cloth through a crack in a door. White mist poured into the crevice like cold smoke, swallowing every outline before her. Clara could hear her heart pounding in her chest, feeling as if the air in the crevice was getting thicker, making each breath heavier. Dusty stood in front of the ravine, legs spread wide, rifle poised at his shoulder. He was as hard as a statue carved from stone. Even in his old age, his shoulders carried the air of a man who had lived more lives than a single human being. Clara pulled Isaac deeper into the darkness. Isaac leaned against the cold stone wall. Sweat rolled down his temples, mixing with the dry dirt. She put her hand on his chest, not to hold him, but to feel that he was still there, still alive. He squeezed her hand gently, saying nothing as if any words were unnecessary. A man's voice rang out outside. Close, very close. I see the footprints. They jumped into the crevice in the rock. Another voice laughed dryly. Do they think they can hide here? There are rocks on all four sides. Just burn all the grass near the mouth of the alley. The smoke will find its way in. Clara heard Isaac hold his breath. She turned and looked him straight in the eye. We won't suffocate here, she said slowly, each word as firm as stone. A small light lit up Isaac's eyes a chance, however slim. Dusty turned his head and whispered, If they really burn the grass, we have to rush out before the smoke fills the alley. But stepping out means facing gunfire. Isaac raised his head slightly. How many names? Dusty listened. At least 3, maybe 4. One was standing at the edge of the alley. I heard boots scraping on rocks. Isaac gritted his teeth. The pain in his shoulder made him tremble, but his eyes were sharper than fire. They want me alive to get information. They don't want you and Dusty alive. Clara squeezed his hand hard. Then you must live. For us. A rustling sound came from the alley. Dusty glanced over. They are gathering hay. Clara took a deep breath, remaining strangely calm. Dusty, is there any other way out? The old man shook his head. This alley has only one exit. What about Jonah? Clara asked. Does he know this way? Isaac said immediately. Yes, he knows, and he knows how they surround him. So he will come. Clara asked softly. Isaac looked deep into the darkness before him, his voice low, almost instinctive. If he is still breathing, Jonah will come. The words felt like a commitment, a link between the past and the present. And Clara felt like it wasn't just for Jonah. It was for her. Outside, the sound of flint striking echoed. Dusty cursed softly. They really did set the fire. Isaac tried to stand, but his legs gave way. Clara caught him, wrapping her arms around his waist. He growled softly. I don't want you to carry me forever. Clara did not take her eyes off. If you are afraid of becoming a burden, then let me tell you I have stood up on my own. I know how to survive, and I also know how to carry others. Not because I am weak, but because I choose to. Isaac paused for a second. The words soft and hard hit him where he always hid. She was pulling him back from the abyss of self-reproach, inch by inch. A small fire flared at the mouth of the alley. The light flickered, reflecting off the stone. One shouted, "Burn the left side." Let the smoke in. Dusty spun his gun. His eyes narrowed like a hawk. They want to smoke us like animals. Isaac looked out too far to shoot, too close to wait. Clara placed her hand on his chest, steadying his breathing. Dusty lowered his gun a little. We have a few seconds before the smoke gets thick. Isaac whispered, almost to himself. I'm going out. Clara turned around. Are not, Isaac looked deep into her eyes. I came out. To hold them back. To let you and Dusty escape. Clara stood up straight, her shoulders small but full of determination. No, he did not sacrifice himself so that we could live. We would live together, or no one would go out alone. Dusty sighed. Girl, he's right. If one person comes out, there's a high chance of saving the other too. Clara turned to the old man, her voice as hard as a rock, and Warner, I respect your experience, but I'm not letting Isaac go out there alone. Isaac grabbed Clara's wrist, his hand cold but squeezing tightly. Clara, I don't want you to die because of me. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a truth Isaac wasn't ready to face. I'm not following you to die. I am here to live with you. Isaac froze. All three were silent. Those words were like a stone dropped into a calm lake, stirring up all that was buried deep. A man outside shouted, Light it, burn it all. The fire flared up more strongly, the red-orange light beginning to reflect clearly on the mouth of the alley. Thick smoke rolled in. Dusty pulled the gun up. No more waiting. I have to go. Isaac nodded vigorously, squeezing Colt in his right hand. Clara stood beside him, not taking a step back. Just as they were about to rush out, a sharp explosion rang out from the right like a bullet ricocheting into rock. One shouted, It's on the right. He shot from the other alley. Dusty startled. That's not us. Isaac straightened up, though his shoulder hurt so much it made his whole body tremble. Jonah, a series of gunshots returned from the pine forest. Claire heard someone scream, then the sound of something heavy falling to the ground. Dusty squinted, trying to see through the mist. Someone is blocking them from the hillside. Clara whispered, Jonah is back. Isaac leaned against the cliff for a moment, his eyes welling with tears but not falling, for the emotion was too great. He lives, and he comes back for us, Dusty growled. No time. Get out. It's now or never. Clara linked arms with Isaac, steadying him. He took her hand, with more force than usual, as if he had just found something he had lost 10 years before. Clara, he said, very softly, thank you for not leaving me. She looked straight at him. I will not leave. Never. Dusty Weak, go. The three men dashed out of the crevice, through the billowing smoke. The wind whipped against their faces. The mist and smoke fused together into a gray-white curtain. Gunfire echoed from the right hillside. A figure stood on the cliff, his shape clear despite the thick fog, tall, broad-shouldered, long coat rifle in hand. Jonah Hale, he is shooting to clear the way. Clara squeezed Isaac's hand. He did this. For you. Isaac breathed heavily, a breath, heavy with pain but also filled with life, like never before. I won't let him fight alone any more. And they ran, through the smoke, through the mist, through the darkness that had held Isaac for the past 10 years. The promise is unspoken, but more alive than any words. None of them will be alone anymore. They rushed out of the crevice in a haze of mist and smoke, the heat of the burning grass behind them hitting Clara's shoulders. But none of the three, Clara, Isaac, or Dusty, paused to look back. For ahead of them, a figure stood on the rocky outcrop of Hawkthorn Hill. Jonah Hale. Jonah's gunfire was steady, rhythmic, and decisive. Not the sound of a daredevil, but of someone who had spent a decade learning to survive in the darkness. Dusty shouted softly, "Go ahead, Jonah is leading the way." Clara supported Isaac, each step heavy and shaky, but this time, each step carried more than pain. There was will. There was choice. There was something Clara realized had only formed in him after days of overcoming danger together, the will to live for something greater than yourself. The wind picked up as they advanced, The mist was gradually lifted by the dawn rising from the southeast of the valley. The light was dim but warm, like the hand of heaven touching the shoulders of those fleeing the edge of death. As they neared Jonah's Point, the gunfire behind them began to fade. One of the pursuers shouted, "Get back! He's up there, get back!" Then came the sound of heavy footsteps running, mixed with angry curses and panting. Jonah fired another warning shot. The bullet ricocheted off the rocks, silencing the others. Dusty nodded in satisfaction. "They're gone. Jonah scared them." Clara said nothing. She looked at Isaac, his neck still tense, his breathing heavy, but his eyes brighter. No more despair, no more gloom, just life. Life, and an emotion greater than words. As they approached Jonah, Isaac almost tried to break free from Clara's grip and take the last step on his own. But his legs were so weak, the pain in his shoulder was so intense that he almost collapsed. Clara immediately grabbed him, preventing him from falling. Jonah walked down the 2 stone steps, his rifle slung across his back. His face was thinner than Isaac remembered, his hair grayer, his skin sunburned, his eyes dark with the dark look of someone who had lived between life and death for many years. But it was still Jonah, still the one Isaac trusted more than anyone. Jonah looked at Isaac and spoke after a long time. "You are still alive." Isaac choked. His lips moved, but no words came out. It took several seconds before he spoke. "As for you, I thought you died in that fire that year." Jonah slowly shook his head. "No. They pulled me out before you came back. They wanted to use me as a pawn, as evidence to accuse you." Isaac closed his eyes. His head bowed as if someone was pulling the weight of 10 years down onto his shoulders. "I lived my life thinking I abandoned you." His voice was hoarse, unable to hide the heaviness. Jonah stepped closer. He placed a rough hand on Isaac's shoulder, the one that wasn't injured. "You didn't leave me." Jonah's voice was low, deep, but soft in that way only someone who has endured so much loneliness can. "They did it so that neither of us could find each other." The wind blew between them. Clara stood beside them, silent. She understood. There were pains only men who had fought side by side could undo, and she did not interfere. Isaac looked up, eyes stinging Jonah. "I'm sorry," Jonah snorted, not letting Isaac finish. "We are both victims. Don't blame yourself for something you didn't do." Isaac nodded slightly, very slowly, as if nodding hurt him, but was a pain that was relieved. Clara saw Isaac stagger. She grabbed him immediately. "You must sit down. The wound is bleeding." Jonah looked at Clara for the first time. He jerked slightly in surprise. "You are," Clara replied softly, without any stylization. "Clara Whitfield. I've been taking care of him since I found him lying in Dustfall Meadow." Jonah looked at Isaac, a look that penetrated to the depths. Isaac was tired, but smiled a little. "She saved me and kept me alive." A simple sentence, but in it, Clara heard more trust, choice, and feelings Isaac had yet to verbally admit. Jonah nodded. "I am grateful to you, Mrs. Whitfield." Clara smiled, polite and gentle. "He is a man worth saving." Isaac turned to her. His eyes lingered on Clara's face longer than necessary, and she looked at him the way a grown woman looks at only one person. Dusty interrupted, his voice gruff but unable to hide his emotion. "All right. You two have been together long enough. We must get out of this gorge. They will reorganize when the mist clears." Jonah nodded. "I know a safe way down the valley." "They don't know it." Dusty whistled softly. "Another secret you're hiding somewhere." Jonah shrugged. "Keeping the secret kept me alive today." Isaac stood up, leaning on Clara, and today that secret helped save us. Jonah looked at Clara, then at Isaac. Not just a secret, also a good companion. His eyes softened as he said that. They left the canyon and followed a narrow trail that ran along the mountainside. Jonah led the way, Dusty keeping watch. Clara and Isaac stayed in the middle. Clara held Isaac firmly by the shoulders, and for the first time, Isaac let himself lean against someone without resisting with the pride of a Western man. She asked softly, "Are you in a lot of pain?" Isaac answered softly, so only she could hear, "Yes, but not in the way you think." Clara frowned. "I do not understand." Isaac looked ahead where the sun was rising over the edge of Silver Creek Junction, casting a soft golden glow on the rocks. "I'm afraid." He paused for a second, as if admitting this made it harder for him to breathe than the pain of losing the only thing that had kept me alive these past few days. Clara understood what Isaac was talking about. Her heart was pounding, but her voice was as gentle as the early morning sun. "You won't lose, unless you let go." Isaac turned to look at her, his eyes deep, honest, trembling at the edge of someone who had long been afraid to believe in warmth. "I won't let go," he said. "This time, I won't let go." Clara nodded slightly, her eyes sparkling in the new light. "Then we will move forward, together." When they reached the valley, the sunlight had dispelled the mist. Birds flew out from the pines, making short, shrill calls, a peaceful sound Clara thought she would never hear again. Jonah stopped and turned to Isaac. "The road ahead will be difficult." "They do not give up," Isaac replied, unafraid. "Me too." Jonah looked at Clara, then at Dusty, then at Isaac. "You three, there is something I have long forgotten," Dusty asked. "What?" Jonah smiled a rare, tired but real smile. "Hope." Clara held Isaac's hand tightly, as if afraid he would disappear in the light. Isaac looked at her, his gray eyes clearer than usual. "Clara, you said you wouldn't leave me behind." Clara pursed her lips, a small but deep smile. "I do not give up. And Isaac swallowed hard. "Choose to move forward with you," Clara replied with a gentle squeeze. Isaac understood. She didn't need big promises, just the truth in his eyes. Dusty sighed. "Okay, enough sentimentality. Now go find shelter. I only have one heart. Don't make it beat too hard for too long." Jonah laughed hoarsely. Isaac looked at Clara and said softly, "Thank you for not leaving me alone." Clara replied, "You will never be alone again." They walked. 4 figures, old and new, moved toward the rising sun. No one knew what lay ahead, but they knew one thing. The silence of the past was no longer a fear. It became the foundation for them to write a new chapter, warmer, more real, more alive. And with every step, Clara understood. There are people who come into our lives not to be loved immediately, but to be taught how to live again. Isaac learned. Jonah returned. Dusty remained like a pillar of stone. And she, Clara, found what she had thought she would never have again for years: a hope, a choice, a new beginning. In Hawkthorn Valley that morning, 4 people set out, leaving behind the clearing mist, and walked together toward a place where light could be seen more clearly than solitude. Clara and Isaac's story reminds us of something simple yet profound. No one goes through life without some wounds. But the strange thing is wounds only truly begin to heal when we allow ourselves to open up, even a little. In our 60s and beyond, many of us have experienced loss, loneliness, or choices that weigh us down. But Clara shows that courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about choosing to keep going despite the fear. And Isaac proves that even people who seem to have lost all hope can find themselves again through the kindness of others. In life, sometimes just a handshake, a gentle word, or a moment of stopping to help someone is enough to rewrite the future. Thank you for taking the time to read this story. If you feel it touches you even a little, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can spread more warm and hopeful stories together.